But that's what happened for the betterment of human history. That's what happened. You questioned the status quo. You question the morality of other humans. You question slavery. You question sexism. You question racism. You would get killed. You would get canceled literally. What I want to really get to with Ethan is no matter where you are in the political spectrum, no matter who you are, what you believe, I do believe there is a cancel culture. And what I guess Ethan can start us off here. What are the ramifications for not saying no to people banishing you from polite society for any reason at all?
Okay, so I could not host a podcast out of being scared of being canceled. Daniel could not host his show out of being scared for being canceled. But we decided we'll take the small risk, sorry for my cat, of having a podcast, of having his show, and because we feel like it could help people. So we'll take the risk because the reward is great. The reward is helping people, which is the greatest reward you can have, the greatest satisfaction you could have. And so I'd like to say Daniel and I have the goal. We're going to filter a little bit because we don't want to be canceled before we can make an impact, but we're not going to filter everything. We're not going to just be submissive to whatever they tell us to say, or be submissive to whatever they tone to tell us to say it. So we're going to say what we want to say, how we're going to say it with a filter, of course. We're not going to just be shameless and what have you. But we have to understand, like, a lot of kids don't share their mind because they feel like, what if I get canceled? What if I get canceled for telling the class stop making fun of this teacher because the teacher is actually pretty cool? You guys are just a little bit annoying. Because I know some of you guys have probably felt that your class has been annoying, but you didn't want to say anything because you didn't want to be the odd one out, and so you just go with the flow. And so sometimes I'd say you got to be an individual. You have to take the risk of being canceled. I'm not saying be shameless or what have you, but don't be so weary and don't be so filtered, because Daniel could just talk about pop culture and there's no ramifications to talking about pop culture. But Daniel wants
I
to talk about philosophy, which has a lot of negative, I guess, risks associated socially.
Yeah, I think there are 2 points that I want to kind of elaborate on that you kind of brushed upon as you were giving your answer. One about radicalization, from people not being able to express their opinions, and the second thing, it kind of escaped me a bit, and that's choosing your battles. Yeah, choosing your battles. So the first point, one of your contentions within your answer about the ramifications of not being able to say no to cancel culture is uh people not being able to express their opinions. I wouldn't start this podcast. Ethan wouldn't start his podcast or give his opinions. And um what that really does is it really causes bad ideas to fester in that dark corner. If you ban almost everybody from polite society, then there'll be actual dangerous conspiracy theories. There'll be really bad ideas that cannot be debated, that cannot be refuted. Uh, and that's kind of what happens in greater human history. Remember, it was only a few hundred years ago where we could have free speech, discourse. It was only 250ish years ago where that was enshrined in supreme law that we call the Constitution. And so, for the most part of history, why do you think for the better part of history there were very small actual moral I guess moral improvements to the human condition, but after the start of making sure free speech is a crucial part to a culture and is recognized legally, why is it after that we start seeing massive moral improvements in the human condition, right? For the better part of human history, there was slavery, right? And people had slaves. But you know, if you talked against the fact that people had slaves, right? If you talked against the fact that people were racist or sexist or X or Y or Z, you would get essentially, I guess, you would get destroyed by other humans who think, well, no, I'm not gonna. They essentially canceled you, but not in the digital sense, in the literal sense, right? If you spoke out against uh their morality, and we even seen this in America, even though we had free speech enshrined in the Constitution. People say, well, if I was a person back then, I would have been an abolitionist. Statistically speaking, most people would not have been an abolitionist, and the abolitionists were getting huge blowback for speaking their mind. There was this abolitionist, I believe his name was Elijah Lovejoy. He got huge blowback. I think he ended up getting murdered, right? And that was in the country with free speech enshrined in the Constitution. Imagine nations and civilizations without free speech, without free speech inside the civilization. For example, I think it's in Rome. There were people who were converting to Christianity, and the blowback was they would get killed. How so? By thousands of people watching you fight other Christians or fight different things. I believe that what happens in Rome, and people can fact check me on that. But that's what happened for the betterment of human history. That's what happened. You questioned the status quo. You questioned the morality of other humans. You questioned slavery. You questioned sexism. You questioned racism. You would get killed. You would get canceled literally. And it is only 250 years ago we had legal recognition, a legal recognition of free speech that allowed people, that give people legal cover, even though they didn't have cultural cover, right? Abolitionists didn't have the cultural cover to speak their minds, but they certainly had the legal cover to speak their minds. And that's how they forcefully gave their opinions to the Americans who refused to listen. And that's why today we can proudly say we are against slavery. We can probably say we are against sexism. We can probably say we are against these things. And that is because we were able to create a culture and a legal system that acknowledges people who have dissenting opinions. And so that's the first point. The second point you kind of brushed on, and I want to get deeper into it, is choosing your battles. And so we have people who are aware of cancel culture, but instead of choosing their battles and trying to prove to people why cancel culture should be canceled, essentially, why cancel culture should be canceled, they kind of they act like fools, and they actively seek to be canceled for the sake of being canceled. That's a perfect way for people to say, maybe cancel culture isn't that bad because he is saying some ridiculous stuff just for us to just to get on our nerves, right? And that's something you shouldn't be doing, right? You've acknowledged the problem. That's the first step, right? You've acknowledged there's cancel culture, or there's problem X, there's problem Y. You choose your battles now. That is the second step. Do not for the sake of just angering other people. Oh, I want to anger those libtards. Oh, I want to anger people on the right. Do not just for the sake of that. Do not just for the sake of angering other people. Try to do whatever you want to do. Do X or do Y, because that's trust me, that is a perfect way of not solving the problem. And so we see a lot of people today who acknowledge cancel culture exists, but instead of actually, proving to people why it shouldn't exist, they add on to the problem by essentially proving to people why it should exist when it shouldn't. So those were two kind of you brushed on these things, right? Not acting like a fool, and also, us being able to take the risk. We have to take the risk in order to speak our minds, because there are huge ramifications if we do not. Those are two things I've heard from what you said, Ethan.
Yeah, I'd also say, like, no one knows who the bad guy is. So now we feel like censoring one side is better because of this or what have you. But that's not going to show us the holes in our practice or the holes in your practice. And so we kind of have to listen to everyone, even if we have to take it with a grain of salt, because I know some people are speaking on impulse, or they're just giving an expression to an impression they have, and it may be a little bit exaggerative. But we can't filter everything one side says or everything one person says. I can't filter everything Daniel says, because yesterday Daniel said that my cousin is a little dumb or what have you. It might have just been a issue in the moment or what have you. And so we also have to realize no one knows who's wrong. No one knows which side is wrong because, as Daniel said, you guys may have not been the standout abolitionist you thought you may have been. If you're not even willing to ask the waiter for an extra this or ask to exchange this, or you're too anxious to do this or that, you can't judge people like Daniel, or you can't judge other people for being expressive, because the more you express yourself, the higher the probability of you being wrong. The more you go outside, the higher the probability of you getting hit by a car. That doesn't mean you are going to get hit by a car, but you're not going to get hit by a car really if you're indoors. But you can't isolate yourself indoors in order to avoid being hit by a car. You have to have some filter. You have to think, why am I doing this? Why should I do this? And you have to understand like the pros and cons of everything. Like, I'm going to go outside because I need fresh air and it helps keeps me sane. I'm I'm not gonna get close to people or what have you, but I'm also not gonna isolate myself in my home, even if this person says it's the right idea. Even if this person says it's the right idea, I'm not this person. I'm not Daniel. I'm not John Doe. I can't do this. I can't stay home all day. I'm not Jane Doe. I can't go to parties without my mask on or what have you. And you have to understand. You have to think for yourself most of the time, and you can't ignore them because they may have some sort of advice that may help you, and so you can't completely ignore John Doe because there's a reason he's staying home. You can't completely ignore Jane Doe because why is she going out and partying? Because she developed a lot of toxic energy, let's just say. And I know a lot of people, like, they get all this energy that cultivates and then they let it out in one shot instead of being steady over the course of a time period. Because I know I went out for walks every day. And so I have no urge to go to parties. I have no urge to go to a place without masks. But some people that stood home all the time, now they gave in and now they go to this place, they go to this person's house or what have you. And so you can't always judge people because they may have been judging me when I went for my walks. This is an example. And then now they gave in and this happened. So you have to take advice, you have to learn from other people, you have to analyze other people because it's a lot easier to learn from others' mistakes than it is to learn from yours. And also, if you're not even willing to make mistakes, like Daniel and I are willing to make mistakes. We know we're going to make a lot of mistakes in the early days of our podcast, in the early days of whatever we may be doing, but we're going to suck it up because we know the reward is great. We know if people actually listen, we're probably going to get canceled. Not get canceled, but the more people that listen, the more likely we are to get canceled. The more people that listen, the more likely we are to help somebody. And so you have to take the risk sometimes. And
And
you have to take the
and
risk of listening to this person, even though they may say something terrible or what have you, but they also may say something that helps you. And so you can't be a fool and filter out everything, but you also you got to be your own person, but you have to understand different things. I don't know entirely what I'm saying, but I know there's something in there that maybe you could learn from, or maybe you could develop in your thought process.
to tip to kind of wrap it all off for saying no to cancel culture, essentially what I think me and Ethan are trying to say is, you know, being able to exert your will on on the impression of greater society is conducive to a free and healthy society. Remember, I said this before in the beginning, right? That that the individual needs to be able the will of the individual, and the fact that every individual has a will and they're able to say no because saying no proves that you have a will, is conducive to a free and healthy society. What cancel culture essentially does is that it artificially cuts off your will, certain parts of your will, certain parts of your beliefs, in order to fit you in the collective. So there's two ways people end up being in this collective, where the dangerous collective, because remember, in the beginning during my monologue, I said there are two types of collectives where individuals come together, not sacrificing their will but coming together to do something great. And there's a collective where people surrender their individual beliefs to a collective ideal, and that's the one that is dangerous for a free and healthy society. Now, there are two ways. There are kind of two ways you can end up having that dangerous type of collective. There are two ways. There is a kind of voluntary way, and there is a I'm kind of I kind of don't have water in my throat right now, but kind of this coercive way of making people submit to this collective, giving their will to be a part of this collective, right? There's a voluntary way and there's a forceful way. The voluntary way is what we see a lot today. That's not the cancel culture variant. That is people, for example, remember when we talked about the friend groups, not being able to say no to your friends and assert your will. There are people who are unable to assert their will within the collective, and so they just go along with whatever their group is saying, whatever beliefs that their group is saying as a collective, not as an individual, right? And so they just voluntarily go with it, voluntary voluntarily go with it. The second way is forceful. Is a coercive way, the coercive manner in which people kind of fit into this dangerous type of collective, and that is cancel culture, right? Where people, in our society, we have a culture of people. We should have a culture, an ideal. We should have a culture of people being able to dissent, to provide dissenting opinions, and for people to talk to each other without fear of being digitally, or in some instances, literally canceled, right? And so cancel culture kind of feeds into that second dangerous form of collectivism, right? That dangerous form of collectivism where you surrender your will, you surrender the individual to the collective. Cancel culture is a forceful, right? Cancel, remember the voluntary and the forceful, right? Those two forms of those two, I guess, ways of becoming a part of this dangerous collective that I speak of. Cancel culture, endorsing cancel culture or promulgating cancel culture in our society is a almost perfect way of having people form that dangerous collective, and by extension endanger our free and healthy